This is the Hermetic seminar. I'm Gallaspie. I run this server in which this event is currently taking place. I help run a bunch of subreddits, help get accurate information around in a world full of misinformation. People know me in the server. Now, whoever would like to go next, introduce yourself to the audience. David Litwa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dr. David Litwa. I don't do only Hermetic stuff, but I do ancient world, antiquity, esotericism, ancient Christianities, alternative Christianities, ancient Alexandria, Egypt. Yeah, but I guess people know me through Hermetica too, and some Hermetic podcasts that I do on YouTube. So thanks for the invitation.
Yes, of course. Glad to have you. And next, Justin Sledge, commonly known online as Esoterica. Would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Also, I should remind folks that Dr. Litwa has a great YouTube channel that you should go subscribe to. Great content there as well. So I'm Dr. Justin Sledge. I'm an academic philosopher, technically, focusing on Western esotericism, which causes me to drift in and out of the world of Hermetica stuff frequently. But yeah, I run a YouTube channel called Esoterica, which is sort of an online platform for making topics in the academic study of Western esotericism more accessible. That's me.
Yes, glad to have you.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Also a great channel.
Yes. Sigismundo, Celine, also known as Donato. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Yes. So Sigismundo Celine is my online name. It's not my real name. And I'm one of the admins and developers of the WayofHermes website. Maybe some people know it. And I'm also the author of the book, The Secret Wisdom of Thoth, which maybe some people have stumbled upon. And I'm very honored to be here and being in the seminar with these Hermetic giants. So thank you very much for inviting me over. And apologies for my strange accent. I'm Dutch and live near Amsterdam. So that maybe explains some strange words or sentences which I will say in this seminar.
Yeah. Very good to have you. Now, Sam Block, otherwise known to us as Polyphanes.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, feel free to introduce yourself.
I'm Polyphanes, also Sam Block. I'm the scum of the internet, the author and blogger behind The Digital Ambler. Terrible sinners, we bloggers. I am a hermeticist and occultist. I study and practice classical hermeticism, a couple aspects of Renaissance occultism, this, that, and the other when it comes to various aspects of occulture, esotericism, spirituality. I have my fingers in a lot of pots. I'm also the admin of the Hermetic House of Life Discord server. So thank you, GR, for having me on to your server for this event. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Now, yeah, good to have all of you people and a lot of people in the Hermetic sphere. So, without further ado, first topic we should likely cover is what is Hermeticism? This wisdom attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. This figure of Hermes Trismegistus is very complex. It's very, very complex, and that could be an entire event or seminar in itself just on the figure, the amount of testimonies and information and people attributing wisdom to this figure and revering this figure. The sage of all sages is the foundation of all knowledge, supposedly. That itself could definitely take up an entire episode. But what we could label as Hermeticism is the historical wisdom and writings attributed to the historical figure of Hermes Trismegistus. And now that we have that out of the way, these texts, these written wisdom, right? What type of influences, what type of historical context are we seeing these texts envelop in the Hellenistic world, in the ancient Mediterranean? I guess that question can be up for anyone.
Dr. Litwa, you translated a good chunk of them. Your footnotes are great.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, well, I guess there's maybe a little bit of dispute about the dating. So you could put it in the Hellenistic period, which runs from anywhere the death of Alexander the Great in Babylon, 323, to about 30 before the Common Era. That's perfectly fine. You could also put them in the early imperial period, which will go up, bring you up until the 2nd century of the Common Era. I suppose there's a kind of both and here, depending on which Hermetic you're interested in. If you're interested in some of the technical astrological stuff, some of that appears to be very, very old. The alchemical stuff might be getting us into late antiquity. What goes under the name of philosophical Hermetica, most people, I think, put that between 1st and 3rd century of the Common Era. I mean, we know it has to exist because people start to mention it certainly by the 2nd and 3rd century CE. So it's I don't think it has a center, and it's really anything, to my mind, I don't know how other people define it, but it's really anything that is attributed to Hermes the Thrice Great, who is an Egyptian deity, who's called Hermes, but he's really Thoth, or Thoth if you prefer, and he's the god of wisdom and the moon, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Very complex figure. But yes, good that you did mention the Egyptian influence is heavily prevalent. Likely that these did emerge in Thebes, Egypt. So a little bit about the influences. Many will speculate Platonic influence on these texts. But I guess to anyone, what type of influences are we seeing on this type of wisdom here? Maybe what may it be comparable to some of this knowledge in these texts in the ancient world?
I mean, I would say that to me, what jumps out is that it's this grab bag of stuff that we call Middle Platonism. Folks like Numenius, the Middle Stoa, Posidonius. So I would say that it's sort of that it's a combination of a good bit of the mechanics of it, to the philosophical mechanics of it, or people like Numenius. But also I would say that insofar as you're trying to read it as Middle Platonism, Hermeticism as Middle Platonism, you're probably missing the forest for the trees. That it's a soteriological tradition, much more so than a philosophical one. I don't think that any high functioning philosopher of the 2nd century would have thought much of the philosophical rigor of the Corpus Hermeticum, frankly. But as a soteriological tradition, I think that's where it really shines.
Yeah, and that was one of the. Oh, sorry.
Go on.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest problems in earlier scholarship in the Hermetic world is, painting this to be something that it's not, and comparing it, especially painting it to be overly Gnostic when in many cases it's not, or painting this to be a literary phenomena or something overly just philosophical food for thought, but more likely a spiritual lived tradition, communal aspect to it. So, yeah, I definitely.
If you're interested in the technical Hermetica, I would say there's a lot of this knowledge seems to derive from Egyptian temple wisdom as well. So if you're just interested in the astrological bits and pieces, a lot of that, I think, it has nothing to do with philosophy. It goes back to Egyptian wisdom traditions. It just so happens that, for whatever reason, Western readers are really interested in the philosophical bits, but that's not everything. So the Book of Thoth, or Thoth, is just an ancient Egyptian text with Hermes, as a dialogue partner, talking about all sorts of ancient lore. And really, the Hermetic deals with all sorts of ancient lore. It is the Egyptian cultural encyclopedia. So some of that wisdom, I would say probably most of that wisdom isn't necessarily directly connected with Greek philosophy at all, but some of it is. So if we're talking about influences, I think we can talk about confluences.
I think the way Dr. Sledge put it, where you have these Hermetic texts that make use of Platonic or in some cases Stoic mechanisms. I think of an infrastructure almost to facilitate a framework, an underlying Egyptian religiosity. I was talking one time with a philosopher friend of mine, because I was noticing in some of the earlier philosophical Hermetic texts, like book 1 and 3 of the Corpus Hermeticum, that there seems to be a lot of Stoic influence. I was wondering how far we could take this as a Stoic Hermeticism. What would Stoicism think of Hermeticism? And it would just be bad Stoicism. There's a lot of differences in some ways that can't really be reconciled with some of the fundamental tenets of Stoicism, even if it uses some of the same terminology, the same framework, the same ideas to do its own thing, which is not philosophy. A lot of people think of Hermetic philosophy. It's the term we've been bandying about for the past couple hundred years. And it's philosophy in the sense it's a love of wisdom, but to say it's a philosophy in the sense of it being Platonism or Epicureanism or Aristotelianism doesn't really do either Hermeticism or the notion of philosophy as we generally recognize it justice. It really is a soteriology, a mysticism, a way of spirituality that isn't so much rational at points, even if it can be super rational.
Yeah, and the word rational might be very misleading. This isn't just nonsense. But the main component is experiential knowledge, right? Gnosis, right?
Yes.
Not in a means of just nonsense come up with, right? And I think this would be a very good way to lead into the Hermetic beliefs and practices, right?
Yeah.
Now that we've got some of the influence out of the way.
Well, I also think we are at a very interesting point in the study of Hermeticism, because with the latest books published by Christian Bull and Wouter Hanegraaf, it finally can shed its Greek philosophical straitjacket. It was for a long time seen as this variant of Greek philosophy, mainly Stoic and Platonic, which it isn't. And the Egyptian influence was just brushed away because that was irrational superstition. And I think now Hermeticism is really getting its own spotlight for what it really is. And it's a mystic method or mystic tradition which used the concepts and language of Greek philosophy, because that was, the lingua franca of the time it was written in. It can be seen as weak philosophy, but it's like Polyphanes said, it was never meant to be a philosophy, a rational, structured philosophy. It is a mystical system that used that specific language.
I definitely agree with you. Yeah, no, especially in earlier scholarship painting this, the whole Egyptian bias in earlier scholarship.
Dr. Litwa
And it is
and
very
Sigismundo, I was kind of also curious about any speculation or thought you have about the relationship between the book we have, The Conversations in the House of Life, which seems to be one of these books of Thoth, and the Corpus Hermeticum, the text we actually have, the 17 texts that have survived. Because for the life of me, I can't find much of a connection. Like I want there to be one. There's a part of me that that I want it to be there, but I'm not seeing it. But I'm also may just not be able to see it because I'm a 2-bit stoic.
Bless you.
There's not a lot of connection. Yeah, there's not a lot of material connection in content. But if you remember the passage in Clement and the Stromates, book 6, where he talks about 42 Hermetic books, and the contents of those seem to look nothing like the Byzantine collection of the Corpus Hermeticum, which of course is a Christian collection. The books that Clement refers to are books of hymns. They're books of astrology. They talk about geography. They talk about sacrifice. They talk about first fruits, prayers, processions, festivals. So I think and we need to talk about center and periphery of Hermeticism. If you think that the Corpus Hermeticum, the Byzantine collection of 17 treatises, the center, then yes, it is going to be troubling to kind of connect it, I think, to a sort of Egyptian tradition. But if that's not the center, and we can see other texts, including the Strabane Hermetica, I think of the Strabane Hermetica 6, which is all about the decans, which are very distinctively Egyptian astrological beings. And there's nothing really philosophical about it. If that was the center, then yes, I think you could very readily connect that to native Egyptian lore, indigenous Egyptian wisdom. So, yeah, I'm one of those people who's trying to get folks away from seeing the Corpus Hermeticum as central. I think that's a Western bias. It's also potentially a Christian bias because they put that together, and it's just a little bit artificial. They're great texts, but we need the whole panoply of Hermetic texts and traditions.
Yes. What we see in the Book of Thoth is, of course, this master-student dialogue going on, which we also see in the Corpus Hermeticum, in the Asclepius, and in the Cor Cosmo, of course, with Isis teaching her son. So maybe there were more texts like these in Egypt, teaching people through the dialogue of a master and a teacher. But yeah, there's no direct link with the Book of Thoth and the Corpus Hermeticum with the contents of it, just the form.
I think in the introduction to when the translators preface to that book, they say that they refer to the book as a pendant to the Hermetic texts, but they also say that there is no connection. That could be explicitly pointed to, but it feels related enough to be put in the same kind of closely related genres, in the sense that it's in a dialogue format. It seems to be centered on a cult of Thoth, which does seem important for the study of Hermeticism. So para-Hermetic, perhaps, but content-wise, not so much.
No.
Or as Dr. Litwa said, it depends on center and periphery, and I think that's a great question. The technical texts of the Hermetic, of technical Hermetic texts, they've often been sort of looked down upon. In fact, many of them still languish in obscurity to this day, still untranslated, especially the ones coming out of the Arabic world, and always thought of as secondary. And I'm sympathetic to Dr. Litwa's position that that the connection between the houses of life and the esoteric wisdom there in terms of metallurgy and other kinds of technical fields, those were never thought of as distinct from other kinds of esoteric lore. And that's a distinction we make in the sense that we think of like Votech schools or something as like lesser than liberal arts schools. And therefore we look down our nose at the Votech people. But it's not a distinction the Egyptians would have made. And I think that when I think about, for instance, alchemy is the combination of that esoteric metallurgical wisdom combined with a theoretical wisdom coming out of, or theoretical ideas coming out of Greece. And that's what makes uniquely alchemy is that they're using that language. Now, I will say that the technical knowledge was far in advance of the theoretical knowledge. All that Aristotle was completely rubbish. But you look at, all you have to do is gaze into Tutankhamun's mask for a few minutes and realize that the technical mastery of what they managed to accomplish.
I think there's also go on.
No, please.
Well, so Dr. Litwa, you brought up SH6, and I have it open as well, and I love the sixth domain fragment. Like, it's a great text on astrology, meteorology, cosmology, but it ends on a really mystic note where it's like, yeah, you have all the 36 decans and you have what comets do, and you have, how the stars, can influence, the fate and everything. It's a very astrological text, very technical in that regard. But it ends on a really mystic note of the whole point of this is to achieve a vision of the divine. That's like the whole impetus of getting into all this technical details, is to get the vision of the divine. That's the purpose, not for its own technical sake. And I think that alignment of focus, the text, I think that's important in establishing what's Hermetic. Not just that it's something that can be attributable to Hermes Trismegistus. That's important. But like, if it's a Hermetic text in the category of the Hermetica, alongside the CH, the SH, the AH. And there has to be this, to my feeling at least, this impetus of mystic union or vision or gnosis of the divine as well.
Yeah, we can also see that in Zosimos, of course. Zosimos, the Egyptian worker with metals, probably associated with one of the temples, who made this beautiful jewelry, had a really high level of craftsmanship. And he talked also about the tinctures and coloring metals. And of course, he didn't believe that you could make lead into gold, literally, but you can make lead look like gold with specific acids and tinctures. But he also was also a mystic. So he looked at his craft and he could see in it a way to approach it mystically and to use his craft to come closer to God as a mystic method, which was also very interesting. And of course, he was, as about the Hanukkah things, probably one of the real Hermetic practitioners in history. So that's also a really interesting figure related to this.
Yeah, it's spirituality with your hands. It's not just theoretical. You can do philosophy in a laboratory or in a forge. That's a bit different than how Westerners normally do it. They usually just sit in their armchair.
I mean, we forget that it's called the great work for a reason, because it's work.
Yeah, and I think also this is Bruno Latour makes this point, and this is why I push back a little bit against Wouter Hanegraaff, who I have great respect for, is that it's not that I don't have a dog in the fight of calling it philosophy or spirituality. I have a dog in the fight of the fact that we have this philosophy, this sense of philosophy is utterly bereft of what philosophy used to mean, which was a way of living and a way of being, which in that way, again, to go to Bruno Latour's point, that sure, calling it philosophy in the way that they understood it and around the turn of the Common Era and either side of that, philosophy has had a much broader sense of what that meant. It could include things like working with your hands. It could include it included how you walk down the street and how you talk to people and how you dealt with your emotions and dealt with the gods and et cetera, et cetera. I think that it's, we just have a bereft notion of philosophy. It's not that we need to use another word, but yeah, I totally agree that That we just have a very since the Enlightenment, we just have a very limited, bereft notion of what philosophy is.
Yes, that's exactly like in the Eastern world. A wise man was not just with the knowledge he had, but also the way he lived his life. That he was a example for others in how he lived, and also that you approach the master not just because he has a lot of knowledge you wanted to learn, but also because you want to become like him, like how he lived. And I think Hermeticism can again become this way of life for modern people. It has its strong core in it, and in that way it becomes more than just this modern rational philosophy that you study like in a structured way, but it really becomes who you are and how you approach life.
Like there's this one technical text, the Sacred Book of Hermes Trismegistus to Asclepius, where it describes the creation of magic rings, 36 magic rings, one for each of the decans. It has a different kind of stone, a different image on the stone, a different herb that you use, and you make a different magic ring for different ailments of the body, which it's absolutely technical. Like there's no explicit salvific mystic element to it. But just like in East Asian systems, you start out as a doctor and then you grow into other forms of science. If Hermeticism is to learn the cosmos, to learn the ways of how things function beneath the veil of mere corporeality, knowing how that works so well and good, but then what can you do with it? Are you becoming a better person? And if you're becoming a better person, do you have the medicine to make other people better, to cure what ails them and make them better as well? That's one of the reasons why technical Hermetica, alchemy, astrology, magic, making talismans, that's all important as well for the Hermetic path.
Yes.
Or even the Quirinities is another great example of that. I mean, maybe the largest Hermetic text that still survives in any sort of graspable way by Western people. Yeah, it's
it's all alphabetized. I love it.
Yeah. So sorry. But yeah. So the biggest thing is that this is more than just a literary phenomena of quote unquote philosophical text, but this is a lived tradition. This was a way of life.
That was also
and
true
we can
for
kind of get into
Stoicism and Socrates and Epicurean sitting around in their gardens. So again, this is how philosophy was done. The Hermeticists aren't unique in this way. It's just that we are weird in the way that we think of philosophy as a set of like rationally derived propositions that you assent to. And then once you assent to them and prove them and you get your possible world semantics right, then you can publish your paper and be done. We have a weird notion of what philosophy is, not them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing misunderstood is the leaving the actual work out of it. So the whole idea of this spiritual journey, and we see throughout the Corpus Hermeticum with Tat, is that Hermes is the teacher figure. He is teaching him how he can get to his level, and he's working with him through this in a linear way. One of the we see this level that Hermes got to, and it doesn't say explicitly in Poimandres that it is Hermes himself, but we can assume that this is Hermes. So essentially, this whole idea that this is a lip, this is a path, this was an oral, with also with text, but teacher to student, right, and a community of people using these texts. And now that we're on the we're covering practices and beliefs and such, the concept of gnosis and knowing, not to be confused with episteme, like discursive knowledge or knowing, but noetic, beyond sensation, feeling, contemplative understanding. Beyond this, if anyone would like to talk a little bit about that, the emphasis of knowledge beyond rational discourse.
So, as someone who does software engineering and computer science for a living, there's obviously a great deal of mathematics that goes on involved with that. And I think one of the most important lessons my advisor in college taught me was about Gödel's incompleteness theorems, where, to simplify it grotesquely, I have something that's true and you can't prove it. We have this whole system of logic that we have to build up predicates. We have ways to prove statements from hypotheses and axioms, and we can do that countlessly, and we can validate or disprove a number of different things, and it's consistent. If you can show something is true with this logic, that's true because it's consistent. There are no oxymorons, there are no contradictions allowed. But even though it's consistent, it cannot be complete, in that you can't prove everything with logic. So how do you get from where we are using our logical systems to somewhere that's also true, but you can't reach? Making that jump without using logic to something that is also true, that's kind of the leap of gnosis, the leap of faith in some ways. But you have to actually jump to get there. That's how I think of it, at least.
Yes. Yeah, this whole topic of gnosis is so very difficult, because if you put that as the aim or goal of Hermeticism, then people think they need to get that goal and they can reach it on their own, maybe something like that. And if they have this experience, then they have arrived as like they are then an enlightened master. And sometimes I think that we put too much emphasis on the pursuit of gnosis, because it can also just happen to you, practicing and not making it into a goal, and also because you have little bits of gnosis and bigger bits of gnosis. For example, you can walk down a street, and then you think you shall go left or right, and then you can feel that left is where you should go. It's a really little thing, but it can be important, the decision that you make. But it can also be this big life-changing moment of enlightenment that you see the behind the veil or something. And if I see the conversations online, there's I think a bit too much focus on gnosis and getting it as the one goal of it all. I much prefer that the goal of Hermeticism is just becoming this loving caretaker of the cosmos, instead of just this one experience of one moment, a little moment.
Yeah, and that's in Hanegraaff's Hermetic Spirituality and the Historic Imagination. He goes about it a very similar approach to it as you do. That it's not like primarily not in a sense very Gnostic in the way that this is like nihilistic escapism, right? But giving birth and beauty is the example he gives, and he uses Socrates and Diotima's dialogue as a way to represent this. And I don't want to sound very woo-woo out there using the word channeling, but glimpsing this and embodying it. And the example he gives is giving birth in beauty, to beauty, in beauty, right? And one of the biggest things is this isn't we don't see very much, for the most part, do not see much anti-cosmic themes within the Hermetica. But rather, embodiment is not the problem. This isn't primarily not a horrible thing, right? But it's the passions and what comes with embodiment with which you can either sink or swim, right? You can either get lost in the wave or you can just surf away with it, right? Use it to your advantage. These very, I guess, vibrant, sensory perception, feeling and emotion and thought, being embodied and all that comes with it. But we all know that this can also have its downsides, Not everything is goes your way. But,
Sigismundo, I'd want to also echo your point about sort of this whole us putting so much emphasis on gnosis. Because when I read the Corpus Hermeticum and other texts, so much of it is about reverence, just cultivating a daily sense of reverence, which is sometimes a very mechanical, like learn to see the beauty in the world around you, learn to respect the gods for that, much more so than, get smacked in the mouth with some magical, mystical thing. But also, this is just not new. I guess I just want to point that out. Like, this is, if you go back to the divided line in Plato also just makes a very simple point that there are going to be non-propositional truths. And that's the line, that's the end of the divided line. That's the noesis at the end. And so in some sense, it sounds like it's some radically new thing, but if you just read a good bit of Plato, Diotima and the divided line make it really clear that, of course, there are going to be non-propositional truths. What a strange belief to believe that all truths have to be propositional. Like, now, as a person who suffers from logical positivism from time to time, I have that worry. But what a strange conception to a priori have that all truths must be propositional. That's just bizarre to me. And that text that point out that there might be truths, there are likely truths that are non-propositional. I don't know. Again, that just shows you how weird we are. We have that is a thing that has to be pointed out and makes us uncomfortable. That is like living in the shadow of such an unhistorical, like historically anomalous way of thinking about philosophy.
And I think this is a reinforcing point, but not everything in the Hermetica is super rational or even esoteric. You can have all sorts of knowledge, some of it very mechanical and practical in the Hermetica as well. So, yeah, if we just live in the world of Corpus Hermeticum 13, where you're sort of going on a mystic journey of the mind, well, that's not everything. You can simply, learn how to make a healing ring, as was mentioned earlier by Polyphanes, and that's also part of Hermetic wisdom. I think it's Wouter who's emphasized this point where noesis and nous are super rational, and that's right, but not always. The words are used differently in different contexts, in and out of Hermetic literature. So some of it, is blow your mind, but other bits of it are, they are scientific in I guess a loose sense. They are totally invested in the world. Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're eureka moments. I think if you've ever proven Pythagorean theorem, the first time you do it in middle school or whatever, when you see that it works and it's true, I don't know about you guys or people in the audience, but I remember the first time I proved Pythagorean theorem, I had to take a step back. I was like, oh my God, that really works. Like there is a sort of the mechanical art of just proving things in geometry. Again, I'm not a mystically inclined person, but seeing that worked was kind of a mind blowing, again, a little mind blow, but in a very like logical, mechanical environment.
I think it's important to bring up the end of CH4 here, how it describes the vision of the divine like as a magnet. Once you have this glimpse of truth, it makes you want more. And I think we see this play out in like the Asclepius and other texts. Gnosis and reverence, you can't really separate them in Hermeticism. Gnosis, having experienced the Gnosis encourages more reverence, and being reverent introduces you to Gnosis. Like they're two sides of the same coin. They both converge. Like I think it was a text I read recently where gnosis like divine grace on high and reverence is divine grace from on low upwards. They meet to bring each other together.
Yes, beautifully said. There's also how do you recognize Gnostic truth when it happens? It's not always this big eureka moments. And in the Hermetic, we also read that we need to learn to see with the eyes of the heart or the eye of nous, which we need to learn. It's not something that just that just happens. So if you have, how do you recognize gnosis? It's not always maybe that easily recognizable. And also, if you are able to recognize gnosis, it also make your life maybe a bit more complicated, because if you can hear the truth with the eye of nous, or see the truth with the eye of nous, well, then you have also to act upon it.
Yeah, if you view Gnostic traditions as inherently transgressive, I think that doesn't work for Hermetic philosophers. I think they, just to echo what's being said, that the piety of the mind here, the reverence, they view themselves as a very, to use a technical expression, a locative movement. They're trying to fit themselves into the cosmos. They're not in rebellion against anyone or anything. They are trying to ease themselves into truth, and they see it everywhere, just, like lights in the cosmos.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. We are in this intermediary position, right? Connected to the divine, but also embodied. So having reverence for what is above us, and also tending to what is below us, right? And I think that's, definitely very big difference with, some of the more anti-cosmic things that were pushed upon in earlier Hermetic scholarship. And what Sigismundo said, opening up your eyes of the heart, realizing what is around you, and this, this reverence for this work of creation, this opportunity to be that we have, right? To either sink or swim. I think, definitely some beautiful stuff. But we got a lot of the practicing. So I guess one of the biggest, problems we see in, the field of Hermeticism is, what is Hermetic, right? How many texts are floating around, and people are getting, I guess, misinformed and having, I guess, a warped view of what Hermeticism was as a historical phenomenon, right? We have mentioned a handful of texts that the audience might not be aware of. We mentioned the Stobaean fragments. We've mentioned the Armenian definitions and the Corpus Hermeticum. So, if any of you would like to, let's start first. I guess with the Corpus Hermeticum. Anyone would like to take that one up?
And the question is, if the Corpus Hermeticum is Hermetic?
No, just a little brief summary of what these texts are containing, what the logistics, and how many texts we have, their contents, and what this means for Hermeticism.
Well, talking about the Corpus Hermeticum is not for the faint of heart anymore, because Christian Wildberg is working on a new edition in which he's going to try to convince you that it is full of interpolations. So if you're reading Copenhaver's translation of the Corpus Hermeticum, which is that collection of Byzantine treatises, things are going to get very interesting in the next couple of years when Wildberg's translation comes out, because it's going to take away a lot of what you think is part of the Corpus Hermeticum. Thankfully, he hasn't touched the Stobaean fragments.
I'm excited to see what his logic is for sorting out interpolations from the text itself, because it's a really cool idea, but I really want to see what his methodology is.
I think it's going to be looking at manuscripts. I mean, if you look at even Ficino's manuscripts, the one he was working with, there are things in the margins that end up in the translation, and those marginal things were not. I mean, their editorial remarks and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be in some sense, really looking at some of these marginal notes and seeing how they snuck into the text. But also, I think it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be much more like, oh yeah, there's going to be some degree of there's going to be some degree of interpretation of what's interpolated.
Because also, did like Styria and Knock also do that too?
To a certain extent. To a certain extent, they did. I mean, they tried to create a critical tradition, or a critical edition. Sorry, but Wilberg thinks that I reviewed his book, so I've seen bits and pieces of it. He thinks that they didn't go quite far enough in removing material, and I think it's going to be a mix of so-called objective and subjective factors here, because ultimately, yes, if you have a marginal note in the text, then what Wilberg is going to try to convince you of is that this worked its way into the text, and that if you remove it, then the two loose ends connect better. So you remove the middle chunk, and then the ends fit better together. And that may convince you, it may not convince you. But of course, there's no manuscript tradition that survives where we see the marginal notes. And then, in the next, version of it, we see those marginal notes as part of the text. That's just Wilberg doing some reverse engineering. But I've taken us away, I feel like, on a tangent. But I should, as a scholarly duty, I note to everyone here, the tsunami is coming. So brace.
So it's a really interesting time to start with the study of Hermeticism. Join the fun.
Oh yeah. We always need some more content to shake up the Hermetic world. It's going to be interesting. Definitely so.
Well, it's really exciting that these old texts still have so much life in them and so much study in them, and that we can still discover new aspects of them or new ways of approaching them. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, and something Hanegraaff says in his book, that no matter how many times he goes through Hermetica, he's always finding something new or a new understanding of things. And it's the exact same way with me. I don't know if that's the same case with everyone else, but always finding a new understanding each time you go through another Hermetic text for a second, third, fourth time. You're always picking up something you previously missed. Wonderful text, though, and there's a reason why. There's so many people find these texts. They hold them very fond to themselves. We talked a little bit about the Corpus Hermeticum. Dr. Litwa, if you'd like to talk, there's not anyone more qualified to speak about the Stobaean fragments. A little bit about the history behind them, John of Stovey. If there's anything you'd like to talk about that in regards to these texts and how we have them now.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to say a little bit about that because I've got to leave in about 10 minutes. Let me just add just a very quick addendum to I think it was raised by Polyphanes, where we have a critical edition of all these texts, or most of them, put out by Knock and Fastigia. And what happened in their critical edition is when they had a text, and they're working primarily in the Greek and then the Latin, when they had a text that just did not make sense, Knock, who is a great scholar, absolutely brilliant, but what he would do is he wouldn't remove the text, he would put a dagger in. And a dagger is a sign, or an obelisk, is an ancient sign where you would say, something's not right here. This does not make sense. And then sort of what Fastigia did, so Fastigia did the French translation, and then he tried to make it make sense. And then Copenhagen, who is more of a Renaissance man, or not a Renaissance man, but an expert on the Renaissance, and not an expert in antiquity, he tried to make sense of the Greek. And he knew Greek, obviously, but you see, whenever he had trouble, he followed Vestigiaire. So the problem that resulted was you have a text that Knox said, this does not make sense. And then Vestigiaire tried to make it sound like it wasn't gobbledygook in French. And then Schopenhauer followed Vestigiaire into translating the French into English. And so you're going to have problems there, major problems. As I said earlier, thankfully, so the Stobaean tradition is entirely separate, and John of Stobie, roughly around 400, writes a series of excerpts for his son and his son's education. I guess it was the best version of homeschooling, and so we've got now loads and loads of excerpts that are not just from the Hermetica. And as I speak, all this entire tradition is being translated by a team. So look for that. But yeah, we have essentially what a 5th century, maybe Christian. We don't really know if he was Christian or not, but it seems like lots of people were happy to be Christian, at that time. But he's writing a series of excerpts for his son, and he includes stuff that didn't survive otherwise. So, and he's in Macedonia. So you get this snapshot of what Hermetic literature looked like in late antique Macedonia. And some of it is stuff that ends up in the Corpus Hermetica. The Byzantine collection made later, but lots of it isn't. And this is really important to remember that, in talking about center and periphery, I've had people come up to me and say, yeah, I mean, is the Stobaean Hermetica even Hermetica? Well, I mean, if you were in late antiquity, this is what you'd be reading. And it's a great snapshot of what you'd see. And so we have different sorts of stuff. And that's very exciting, because if we only had the Byzantine collection survive, it'd be a very, very, very narrow slit through which we see the Hermetica. But thanks to Stobaeus, as he's called, or John of Stobie, we have excerpts, and they're quite full, right? So in many cases, he just takes a phrase, but in some cases, he takes the whole treatise. So the most famous example here is the Korikosmu, which probably designates a whole series of treatises in which Isis is talking to Horus. And it's very exciting material, and I hope everybody doesn't ignore it. This is like my mission in life. If you're really interested in the Hermetica, don't forget this stuff, because it has even more of a claim to antiquity.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Having an understanding of the historical and regional influences in which these things enveloped will be especially helpful for understanding this phenomenon. Definitely so.
And less interpolations.
Yeah. A similar collection of texts where we see some it's Hermetic material is the PGM, or Greek magical papyri. Is there anything you'd like to add about that, Sam?
Oh goodness, there's so much there, and we only have like 5 minutes left before the hour's up.
You're right.
Yeah, we can stop for another time. There's a lot there. Some of it's Hermetic, some of it isn't. But it's all useful, all great stuff. Get into PGM, do it.
Yeah.
And also, I'll add to Dr. Litwa's point about the sort of corrupt state of the Byzantine material. The Latin Asclepius is also even his history known to be badly corrupt. There were complaints about it in antiquity. It's also another text that has whether it was corrupt in Greek and they tried to make it make sense in Latin, which they, or what, we don't know what it was, but the Asclepius is also kind of I think the Corpus Hermeticum just has a weird bad history of this, right? Whether it's Ficino's, bad translation or not bad, just unfinished and published without his consent translation. This text really has been baldardized through history in really unfortunate ways, which is again why we are lucky to have the Stobaean fragments and texts like the Hermetic definitions and in Armenian, which again, just to think that the tradition made it all the way to Armenia, and of course the huge scholarship that goes on in Armenia, one wonders like what in the world was the cultural context for that transmission, which is just in the enormously interesting academic world of Armenian translation projects that happened back then. But yeah, this is just a sort of the same song and dance we've been playing for the past couple thousand years with these texts getting corrupt.
And a great illustration of this, I encourage everybody here to do this as a sort of exercise. We have the prayer of thanksgiving, which is this great Hermetic prayer, and we've got it in 3 versions. And you can actually go check the versions yourselves and see how they read differently. So we've got something, a version of that survives in PGM, Papyrus Mimo, I think it's PGM 3. And then we've got the prayer of thanksgiving at the end of the Asclepius, which is in Latin. And then, thank God, we have a Coptic version in Nag Hammadi Codex 6. And I mean, I'll just lay down my cards here. I think the Coptic version is far superior to both the Greek and the Latin. And the temptation was, well, why don't we prioritize the Greek? Because that's probably its original language. But that doesn't mean that it's the least corrupt version, right? You can see things that have been clipped off of it. And when you compare the texts side by side, wow, they look different. I mean, you can tell it's the same prayer, but they do look different. And so you can see the modes of transmission there, patterns of corruption, on your own time, at your own pace. So check that out.
I linked my own blog post. Forgive me for to my own. I linked my own blog post to my own analysis, the 3 versions, exactly how you said. So yeah.
And if folks have been following,
so learn Coptic. Sorry.
yeah, no, absolutely. And if folks also have been following Dr. Kristen Switza's work, that's also online on YouTube. She's also been showing that the Betz translation and the Presendants, if you're really looking closely at the manuscript of the Greek magical papyrus, is a mess. There's going to have to be a whole new version. The Presendants is old. It wasn't done that well. Even whole chunks of the manuscript sometimes left off. It is, even though we've inherited the Betz edition, there's good reason to believe that it is also going to need significant updates. We were just doing an analysis of a few months ago of the so-called the Akephalos. And if you look at the manuscript, some of the magical words are just left totally out of the Betz translation. On the one hand, we should be very thankful for the kind of work that folks like Dr. Litwa do, because you, Dr. Litwa, are doing the work of bringing these texts into modernity, or even the first generation of folks like Presendants and even Betz in the second and a half generation did so much work, but also it's amazing how much remains to be done. So I want to express my appreciation for you, Dr. Litwa. The work you did with Hermetica 2 was vitally important work, and I want to express my appreciation for that.
Truly, thank you. It's a great collection, a great text. I love going through it. I prefer the SH text more than the CH. Thank you for the work you've done.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you both. Yeah, and I just want to say I have to apologize to everyone. I've got to step out just for family obligations. But this has been a wonderful session. I want to thank everybody here for coming. And I hope you're able to continue it at least a bit after I depart. So thank you again. It's wonderful seeing speakers and everybody in the audience. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Litwa.
Yes.
Great.
Hey, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks.
And unfortunately, I have to do the same. I also have family duties, but I would love to come back to talk more Medieval Hermetica. Also invite maybe over Dr. Dana Trell, who's working on translating some of the technical medieval Hermetica, which don't get any day in the sun. They're the pool meme with the drowning girl and the guy and the skeleton at the bottom. They're the medieval Hermetica don't get shown, but he's working on translating them now, so maybe we could bring him over. But I'd recommend that. But also happy to come back and talk more about Renaissance Hermetica, which also I think Ludovico Lazzarelli and other folks like that. And I'd be curious to, this is a conversation I'd love to have with folks both in the chat, but also you, Polyphanes, where, where do you draw the line? Most people agree at some level the Kabbalion is definitely beyond the pale.
Why did you have to say the word? Why?
It's bound to come up. It's always bound to come up.
The thought the Atlanteans also beyond the pale, but I'm always curious, like what is, would folks consider like Lazzarelli? Who again, by his own admission, is the first person that we know in history to call himself a Hermeticist. And if we think of Hermeticism as a kind of syncretized, Egyptian Hellenistic kind of religion, how far can we push that syncretization? Can we push it to Christianity? Can we push it to New Thought? Can we push it to? And again, I think that's now, I'm glad as an academic I don't have a dog in that fight. Because I just have to study the texts as they are, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. If it calls itself Hermetic, I have to study it as Hermetic. But I think I'd love to come back and when I have some more time and talk about that, sort of Renaissance Hermeticism and how balderdized it was, and is Agrippa, what sense does it make sense to call him a Hermeticist? I don't know, more questions like that. But unfortunately, I also have to run. But any knee-jerk, fire from the hip response to that?
Who, me?
Yeah. Just like how far can if syncretizing is the name of the game, how far can it go?
I mean, nothing under the sun, right? I mean, we can always maintain the same core ideas and theses and change the window dressing, change the presentation. But as long as it, keeps the same core, the same beating heart, I think that's important. And we don't always see that in every text. Lazzarelli's work, the Crater Hermetis, I think that has a good reason to be called Hermetic. It's way more Christian than is to my taste, but I won't deny that it's a Hermetic text. The Kabbalion, because you had to bring up that word, that doesn't maintain the same beating heart. And that it just keeps the window dressing, but then discards like the purpose. So I wouldn't be inclined to call that Hermetic.
Sure. I tend to agree for largely philosophical reasons that it's a Hermetic in name only. But
yeah, I prefer like a more substance-based definition. If it's substantially Hermetic, then I would say it's Hermetic. If it lacks the substance, not really. That's my approach, at least.
Yeah, and that's why I would consider Lazzarelli and Agrippa to be in that camp, although much more on the Christian side of things. But gentlemen, I have to run. I'm sorry I only was able to hang out for an hour, but GR, let me thank you. Let me thank you especially for doing the legwork of it's like herding hermeticists, trying to get everyone's times and dates and everything lined up. So I really want to appreciate you publicly for having done the hard work of making this happen, and also I want to say that I'd love to come back, and I really appreciate the invitation, and thank you for the great conversation, Polyphanes and Sigismundo. Sigismundo, it's also great to meet you in Amsterdam. So it was a pleasure getting to meet you there. So the talk with Wouter.
I hope to see you soon again in Amsterdam. If you ever come to Amsterdam, let me know.
I will definitely do that. Yeah, hopefully the Embassy of the Free Mind and I have been in some conversations, and hopefully we'll be doing some more work together. But thank you for everyone in the chat, and thank you everyone for being on the panel, and I hope to be able to come back and talk more Hermetica.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure having you.
It was great to talk to you again.
It was a great honor. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. But yeah, let's do it again. And the well's plenty deep, so we have plenty to work with.